Have you ever wondered what happens when the love you swore to bury returns and knocks on your door as if time had never passed? I'm not talking about just any love, but the one that set youth ablaze when everything said it was forbidden. My story begins like this. It's not a made-up tale. It's real life, made of choices, silences, and reunions that leave their mark. It was a normal Tuesday. I left the house wearing the same light blue shirt, adjusted my barely weighted wedding ring, and entered Mr. Nestor's barber shop. The smell of lotion and brewed coffee seemed to say nothing would change. I sat down in the chair when a laugh crossed the street and froze everything. It wasn't just any laugh, it was a living memory. I looked through the window and saw a man with grey hair, a firm stride, and old dimples. My heart skipped a beat. It was Miguel. I stood up without realizing it. Mateus, the apprentice, asked if everything was okay. I said yes, but I was already on the sidewalk. Across the street, Miguel stopped. He saw me and time stood still. I heard my nickname, the one no one had used in decades. I responded with a choked voice. The neighborhood continued with horns honking and children running, but for us the world stood still. We stood still for seconds that felt like years. Miguel suggested a cafe on the corner. I didn't have just a few minutes. I was behind on life. I agreed, and we walked in silence to Donna Inez's little cafe, a neighborhood haunt. We sat across from each other. The fan seemed too loud. He asked about my life. I told him I was married, had 2 children, and a grandchild. He said he also got married, had a daughter, and lived nearby. Miguel confessed that he had reached out to me once back then, but someone answered and he hung up. I admitted that I had also tried to find him, devising ways to cross paths with him. I lacked courage. When our eyes met, the flame hidden for 4 decades flared up without asking permission. Along with it came fear of reopening wounds, of crumbling facades. The doorbell rang. Rita, my ex-wife, entered. She saw me standing in front of Miguel, our hands almost touching, her eyes carrying what I'd never said. She took a deep breath and told me we needed to talk. Not here. The door slammed shut and I remained paralyzed. Miguel lowered his eyes, as if carrying a guilt that wasn't just his. I could barely say that pain has been with me since 1979. From the outside, the city remained indifferent. Inside, everything had changed. When the past invades the present, no closet can hold the truth for long. If you've ever felt the weight of a forbidden love, write in the comments the phrase, "I know what it's like to hide." I want to see how many voices walk with me. And if this story has touched you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Help the video reach other men who also need to hear this message. I left the cafe with shaky legs, like someone walking through a storm. Without an umbrella. Miguel walked me to the door but didn't take another step. His look was apologetic for something that wasn't his fault. Rita waited for me on the sidewalk, arms crossed, chin held high. I know her well enough to know there wouldn't be any shouting. The steadfast silence was always more devastating. We got in the car. The radio, at a low volume, tried to fill in what neither of us could name. As we parked, Rita simply said, "I want the truth." That night, alone, I sat in the armchair and stared at the bookshelf with picture frames. The family photos stared back at me. I saw my children's smiles, parties, and birthdays. Everything seemed perfect. Behind each image was the absence of who I was. I picked up a photo from my time dating Rita. Miguel had passed by on his bike that afternoon. I smiled for the camera and hid the hurricane. For everyone, it was proof of happiness. For me, it was a portrait of escape. Days later, fate decided to play tricks again. At the Sea Market, pushing the cart, I heard the same laugh. Miguel was in the bread section. He saw me and came up to me with a smile that mixed shyness and courage. He jokingly asked about the bread. I replied bluntly that it wasn't the bread I needed. He grabbed my arm and told me not to run away anymore. It was seconds of contact and a lifetime of impact. I looked around, alert for glances, but he didn't let go right away. His words stayed with me until I got home. The insomnia was relentless. I closed my eyes, and a movie came back. The schoolyard, the park bench, the folded notes, the first touch of a hand. I remembered the vow I made to myself to bury that love. Today I know. Time doesn't heal what's born true. Time postpones. At the same time, Rita's words echoed. She always knew. My silence hurt her too. How many people I hurt by supporting a role that wasn't mine. The past doesn't change. The present does. The following Sunday, without planning, I ran into Miguel in the square. He was reading a newspaper, as if waiting and not waiting. I sat next to him. We sat in silence, watching the children. He asked if I remembered my last words before the end. I didn't. He said that one day I said I didn't want to lose him, but that I didn't have the courage to have him. Then he asked if I would still be without the courage. My heart skipped a beat. I said it wasn't simple. He replied that the choice was simple, to love or to keep pretending. There I understood that life was confronting me with the same dilemma, now with the maturity of a man who has already lost too much. My heart beat urgently. I was torn between the family I had built and the freedom I had always wanted, between reputation and truth, between the fear that protected me and the love that called to me. Miguel didn't pressure me. He said he just needed to say what he felt. 40 years of wondering what it would have been like. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life wondering again. A dog escaped from a child, stopped between us and wagged its tail, interrupting what seemed like an invisible duel. The owner apologized, took the animal away, and that moment gave us a breather. Miguel stood, straightened his coat, and said he would leave, but that I should really think about it, because he wouldn't accept returning to silence. I returned home with the inner mirror lit. For the next few days I couldn't concentrate, until Rita called and asked bluntly if I still loved that man. I said yes. She sighed and asked me not to use her as a shield anymore. She said each of us deserved our own truth. Over the weekend I couldn't resist. I went to Miguel's house. I rang the doorbell, my heart racing. He opened the door with a smile that time has not erased. We talked a lot. We laughed, we cried, we were silent. He put on an old song and extended his hand. I accepted. We danced slowly, two mature men with the flame of youth burning within. Then I understood. There was no longer any escape. But every joy comes at a price. Every step toward Miguel meant moving away from the life I'd built. Freedom costs. If this part spoke to you, leave a like now and subscribe to continue reading. Write in the comments, I know what it's like to hide. Your presence here matters and helps this story reach those in need. The next morning arrived like someone pushing open a door without asking permission. I woke with the memory of the dance engraved on my body and a lightness that clashed with the weight of age. I made coffee, but even the sound of water in the kettle seemed different, as if every gesture said, you're not in the same place. I put on my usual shirt and went out into the street, trying to appear normal. It was impossible. At work they said I felt lighter. I knew why. That afternoon I passed by the square and found Miguel sitting on the bench. He didn't ask anything. He simply made room beside me, as if offering shelter. We sat there, quiet, relearning how to breathe. That weekend we had a family lunch. Rita came, my children too, and my grandson turned the living room into a park. I tried to behave as usual, but there was a different gravity in the air. Helena noticed first. She said I was distracted, with a glint in my eye. I tried to joke, but my voice was shaking. Rita cut in, saying I was thinking about the past. That was all. The sentence hung over the table like a cloud that doesn't rain. When the house emptied, Rita called me to the porch. The wind brought the scent of rain and memories. She lit a cigarette, an old gesture of anxiety, and spoke with a calm that dismantled me. I saw you at the cafe with him. I know that look. You're going to have to decide. I was still looking for ways to hide it, but the truth was already making itself heard. She didn't want a speech. She just wanted to know if I had the courage to admit to myself what the world was already beginning to see. I spent the next few days in a state of turmoil. I met Miguel for quick coffees, a short walk, a conversation in the car. Each encounter brought back years of my youth, and each goodbye exacted a toll of guilt. One night he held my hand in the park. My impulse was to let go. I didn't. The simple gesture lit lights that had been dormant within me. I felt that freedom is a breeze that enters through cracks and then demands open windows. The world around us reacted as it always does. First with silence, then with noise. Two acquaintances from work saw us at a discreet restaurant. My body froze and I pulled Miguel's hand without thinking. He took a second before letting go and said softly, "The shame is not ours." That sentence haunted me like a bell. I knew it was true, but fear has persistent roots. I lay awake all night, remembering the times I stopped living to fit into what was expected of me. One rainy afternoon, I went to his house. He prepared a simple dinner. We talked about the past, about the notes we'd kept as if they were medals, about the many corners we'd avoided out of fear. At the end, Miguel said something that became crucial. He wasn't asking me to abandon anyone. He was asking me not to abandon myself. I remained silent because I understood that this was the heaviest debt of my life. Paying this debt would require choices I'd always put off. My daughter Helena noticed before anyone else. One night, she showed up with 2 cups of tea and sat with me in the kitchen. She told me I didn't have to face anything alone. I didn't ask for details. I didn't dismantle my defenses. I simply thanked her. My son Daniel is more direct. During dinner, he commented that I'd been going out too much. He asked who was changing my mood. I deflected. He insisted with a phrase that stuck with me. We deserve the truth. I deserved mine, they deserved theirs. Miguel crossed the same bridge with more confidence than I did. He spoke of the future with a serenity that frightened me. He said he'd wasted too much time and didn't want to lose the rest. I was still counting the potential losses like someone calculating back taxes. He reminded me that living in hiding exacts higher interest rates. I listened and thought of Mr. Nestor's barbershop, Donna Inez's cafe, of the places where the simple life would become a test for both of us. One day I ran into Alvaro, an old friend, the kind who's watched you grow up and isn't fooled by your mask. He invited me for a walk. After a few minutes, he stopped and said he'd always known. There was something inside me that I guarded tooth and nail. He didn't speak with judgment. He spoke with weariness. He said that facades weigh heavy and crumble. I left that conversation with aching shoulders and a burning question. How many more years will I spend holding up the wall that's already cracking? While volunteering at church, the first whispers emerged. Nothing said directly to me, just phrases about good manners and misplaced courage. I continued stacking chairs, arranging pews, turning on lights, but I wasn't the same. At home, the fatigue was immaterial. It was the fatigue of hiding. I understood that living between 2 worlds is like walking a tightrope that grows thinner with every step. The moment came from the most unlikely person. My grandson ran to me with a drawing in his hands. There were 2 adults holding hands, and he was in the middle, under an exaggerated yellow sun. He said it was my family when I smiled with a friend. I was speechless. There was what? So. Many adults complicate and a child understands naturally. That night, lying in bed, all I could think was that perhaps simplicity is the secret name of truth. At the market, at the bakery, on the street, glances lingered a second longer. Some were curious, others judgmental. Few were kind. Miguel helped me keep pace. He said courage isn't noise, it's consistency, repeating the right gesture until the body learns and the city gets used to it. Sunday arrived, and I decided to stop procrastinating. I called the family for a short conversation, without speech. Rita arrived with her usual firmness, Helena with her eyes alert, Daniel with his shoulders tense. I said I'd loved Miguel since I was young and that I couldn't pretend anymore. No one made a scene. The clock marked time with clear beats. Rita was precise. She said she was angry with time, not me, that she would follow her path. Helena thanked me for not leaving you in the dark. Daniel stood, paced the room, and said he was angry and confused but wanted to hear from me. He asked if it was for real. I replied that I was learning the steps and that today I wanted to go with Miguel. When the conversation ended, I felt like I was breathing again. There was no party. There was a real ground. Later, I texted Miguel and he replied with a sentence I needed to read. Tomorrow we walk, slowly, hand in hand wherever possible, in our pockets when not, without turning back. I read it and realized that courage is also rhythm. Haste doesn't suit someone who has carried silence for decades. If this part resonated with you, please like and subscribe to follow along. If this part touched you, please share the video with anyone who needs to hear it. Honest comments like yours give me the strength to continue this series. Write in the comments, I would have courage if you feel it's time to choose the truth. Your voice inspires other men who need to know they are not alone. I woke before sunrise, the promise I'd made to myself. Pounding in my chest, I wanted to live whole. I sent a short message to Miguel and left. The street was almost empty. The janitor was sweeping the sidewalk. A dog was stretching on the step. I found Miguel on the park bench, as agreed. He stood and offered me his hand wordlessly. I accepted. We walked slowly, like someone teaching their legs to navigate a new world. We passed Mr. Nestor's barbershop. I saw Mateus setting up the counter and the radio playing an old song. He saw me through the window and nodded in a discreet greeting. The simple gesture was worth more than a speech. At Donna Inez's cafe, the door creaked as usual. The smell of cheese bread filled the air. We sat in a corner near the window. Inez placed 2 cups on the table and, without asking, left another napkin. I understood that care as an embrace without arms. A young couple looked at us, whispered, and then returned to their own business. I took a deep breath. Normalcy is a place achieved with small steps. We continued down the street to the church. I needed to cross that stretch without changing sides. The volunteer coordinator was talking to 2 men on the steps. He saw me and said good morning. I responded. There was a narrow corridor there that demanded dignity. I didn't want to prove anything. I just walked by. When I turned the corner, I realized my body had forgotten the posture of fear for a few minutes. Miguel noticed and squeezed my hand lightly. I knew I was doing what needed to be done, at my own pace. In the afternoon, I met up with Alvaro, my childhood friend. He brought up soccer and tomato prices like someone preparing the ground. Then he asked if I was sleeping better. I answered yes and no. Sleep came in blocks, as if the hours also required courage. Alvaro said that facades are tiring and that I looked like someone who decided to breathe. I thanked him. Friends like him hold the world together with a weightless phrase. At the beginning of the week, the invitation to the Condos Bazaar arrived. I sent Miguel the photo and asked if he would go. He said he would if I went. I did. I entered the room with the checkered tablecloth on the tables, cake on a glass plate, and the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. I greeted everyone who approached and did what I always do, which is help out where I can. Miguel arrived a few minutes later. We stood side by side at the used bookstand, leafing through titles that reminded me of my youth. A neighbor took a general photo of the event. That evening, the image appeared in the neighborhood group. Someone enlarged it and circled our spot with a colorful mark. The text read, "Dear neighbors." It was a compliment, a rumor, a test. The phone rang. It was Daniel. He asked if everything was okay and said the city would be reporting. He wanted to know if I was prepared. I said I don't know if it's possible to be prepared, but that I was tired of asking permission to exist. He asked me not to let the noise become a wall between us. I promised. Then Helena's message arrived. She wanted to come over the next day, just the 2 of us. I accepted. When she arrived, she brought cheese bread and patience. We sat in the kitchen, where life usually settles down. I told her how it all began in the barber shop, how the square became a stage, how a hesitant hand can learn to stay. She squeezed mine and said, "Thank you for choosing the truth over the shadow of the hallway." I went back to helping at the church. The room looked the same, but I was no longer. There was a long lecture on good values. There were measured pauses between sentences. No one said my name. I got the message. In the end, the coordinator approached and suggested a meeting. We scheduled it for the next morning before the activities. I left with a firm step and a different kind of tiredness, the tiredness of someone who can no longer run away. That night, Miguel invited us to dinner. Stroganoff, like back in the day when simple dishes were their feast. We laughed at souvenirs and fell silent when emotion demanded it. He put on an old song, and I told him there was no need to dance. Still, we stood up, 2 mature men taking short, silent steps, as if grateful for what was still possible. I said I was scared. He said he was too, but that fear no longer ruled. I left with the idea that courage is a routine, not a moment. On the day of the conversation with the family, I had been clear. There was no explosion. There was a ground. After that, Rita showed up at my door with a wrapped cake. She said it wouldn't be easy, that there was anger at the time that doesn't return, and that she would follow her path without becoming my enemy. I apologized for what had been staged for years. She replied that she would survive and asked if I would. I promised. She'd known my gaze since before I knew myself. I felt gratitude for her firmness, which restored my responsibility to be honest without disappearing. The following days, mixed small, trials with discreet victories. At the bakery, a saleswoman who had always been friendly became dry. Across the counter, a young man made room for me with a gesture of solidarity. On the street, a man commented loudly that times are strange. Further on, a young woman told me to be strong in a tone that wasn't pity but an invitation. The world is a balance that never stands still. I learned to breathe between one reaction and the next. My grandson asked me to take him to the ice cream vendor in the square. He held my hand with his left and Miguel's with his right, as naturally as someone who knows the center of a bridge. The vendor filled 2 cones and a small container, without laughter, without comment. I felt that moment, simple to the core, was a kind of arrival. Arriving not at a place but at a state of truth. The scheduled meeting with the church coordinator took place in the empty sacristy. He spoke about tradition, community, and testimony. I listened respectfully and said that I still had the same desire to serve, and that now I was doing it wholeheartedly. He nodded without agreeing or denying. We concluded with a, "Let's move on." I understood that some doors remain ajar for too long. It's not defeat, it's another path. One afternoon I saw Alvaro again. He repeated that facades fall, and I replied that when they fall, they raise dust. He said the dust settles, and what remains is what has always been. I thought about my entire life, photos on the shelves, practiced smiles, filled calendars, children raised. None of this is lost when the truth comes. What is lost is the distance between what is shown and what is, and this loss is gain. As the days passed, Miguel and I learned a simple choreography, holding hands where possible, discreet when not, no longer hiding from each other. The people in the neighborhood began to memorize our presence like church clocks. Some still frown, others no longer notice, and I stopped interpreting every glance as a sentence. It's liberating when the world stops being a courtroom. If this story sparked a light in you, please like and subscribe to follow the sequel. Honest feedback helps the story reach those in need. Write in the comments, "I know the weight of the gaze," if you've ever walked through a room carrying silence. I read everything and respond when I can, because this series is a journey we're on together. The following days took on a new rhythm, as if I'd finally caught up with the world. I woke early, texted Miguel, and went for a walk. The square became a path again, not a hiding place. The newspaper vendor raised his hand in a simple wave. The janitor swept leaves with the calm of someone familiar with mornings, and I realized the sky was the same blue as my youth. Miguel arrived with the folded newspaper, and a pleasant silence greeted us. He extended his hand, I took it, and the city didn't fall apart. It was just a gesture, but inside me it felt like a clean slate. We walked down the block to Mr. Nestor's barbershop, where everything began again. Inside, the radio played an old bolero. Mateus swept the floor. When he saw us through the window, he nodded, without curiosity, without surprise. I felt the routine slowly accepting my truth. I went in to get my hair cut. Mateus adjusted the cape on my shoulders and asked for the usual clipper. I confirmed, clipper 2, careful contouring. In the mirror, the same face, but with a clearer look. 2 customers were discussing soccer. One commented that the neighborhood is different. Another replied that everyone knows their own business and that the street belongs to everyone. Mr. Nestor didn't join in the conversation. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder, brief and firm, the way someone who'd watched me grow up. There are gestures that support without words. I left with my hair fixed and my breathing even. At Donna Inez's cafe, the cheese bread came out steaming. She brought 2 cups, left an extra napkin, and didn't ask any questions. A couple glanced quickly and then returned to their own business. I took a breath. Normalcy is a silent achievement. Miguel commented that the corner near the window seemed to shield us from the excessive stares. I agreed. The window overlooked the street, and the street reminded me that life goes on despite the noise. At home, I cleaned the picture frames. In an old photo, Rita and I were smiling properly. Helena and Daniel were small, each with a balloon. I felt like apologizing for everything that didn't fit in that frame. I picked up the phone and texted Helena, "If I could, I'd drop by tonight." She said yes after putting her son to bed. Daniel texted too. He said he was close by if I needed him. I replied that I needed him to stay, even when the city decided to speak loudly. Helena arrived with cheese bread and the watchful eye she inherited from her mother. We chose the kitchen. I told her how the barbershop knocked down a section of the wall, how the square became a road, and how Miguel's hand taught me to walk without hiding. When the words got stuck, she squeezed my hand. I said the comments would come, that runners repeat everything, but what we say at home carries more weight. I asked her to let me know if the street talk started to hurt. She promised she would let me know and that we would walk together. That held me up like a firm step. The next day, Daniel took me out for a casual lunch. Rice, beans, grilled meat, and a clear juice. That reminded me of the bar I'd been in my youth. He said he was angry and confused, but that I wasn't his enemy. I was grateful to hear that from my own son. He asked if I was sure of the path I was on. I replied that I was certain of one thing. I didn't want to disappear anymore. He nodded slowly and asked me to keep them in mind while I learned to adapt to my new life. I promised, because promises only matter when we learn to keep them in our daily lives. Sunday brought the condo's yard sale. I'd sent Miguel the invitation, and he said he'd go if I could. I went early, helped line up coats, pushed boxes, and chatted with the cake lady. Miguel arrived with his bright smile without asking permission. We stood side by side at the used book stand. He opened a worn volume and whispered that it contained poems from the year it all began. I smiled. A neighbor took a general photo. That evening, the image appeared in the neighborhood group with the caption, "Battered. Room." Someone enlarged it, circled our corner, and wrote, "Dear neighbors." The phrase said everything and nothing at once. I read it, took a breath, and put my phone away. At the church, the coordinator called me in for a pre-volunteer talk. The smell of wax filled the sacristy. He spoke of tradition, of witness, of caring for the young. I listened without crossing my arms. I said my desire to serve was the same, but now I was doing it wholeheartedly. He nodded curtly, neither blessing nor harsh. I understood that this would be a process without deadlines. I left at peace. Not every path needs a clarion call to exist. Rita appeared with a wrapped cake. We sat in the living room. She said she wouldn't be a guardian of the past, but she wouldn't accept disappearing from the present. She asked for honesty without disappearing, and asked me to be a father, even if it meant crossing another bridge. I said I wanted the same, a solid roof over my head for Helena and Daniel, and space for what was being born. Before leaving, she asked if I would speak at the open mic the neighborhood had announced for the weekend. I replied that I didn't know yet. She asked for respect if I decided to speak. I assured her that respect would be given, and took a piece of cake to the kitchen as if silently thanking her. The next afternoon, my grandson arrived with a drawing, 3 figures holding hands, me in the middle, Miguel on one side, him on the other. A huge sun filled the page. I asked who they were. He said it was us going for ice cream. I kept the page in my hands. Children understand faster than we do. There was drawn what I was trying to explain in long sentences. I put the drawing on the shelf, next to the old photo, like someone placing light next to shadow. The day before, the microphone brought little calm. It wasn't fear of speaking, it was the weight of the gesture. Public squares have a different kind of echo. Miguel asked if I wanted him to come. I said yes, that I needed him around with or without speaking. He replied that he would be at his usual bench with the newspaper, and that was enough. His presence was exactly the size of the courage I lack on bad days. On the appointed day, the organizer tested the sound, adjusted the wires, and called for anyone who wanted to give messages. People talked about the vegetable garden, the school fair, a coat drive. I stood up when my body decided before my head. I walked to the microphone like someone crossing a narrow bridge looking straight ahead. I said my name, I said where I live, I said that I am a father and grandfather, and that it took me many years to speak without apologizing. I spoke of respect, of truth, and the price of silence. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked that everyone in the square maintain the same right to exist that they demand for themselves. When I finished, the air hung suspended. A timid applause grew louder. Donna Inez clapped heartily. Mr. Nestor lifted his chin in a yes, and I descended with firm legs. Miguel stood beside me without saying a word. His presence spoke volumes for both of us. If this story spoke to you, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. I'll be right there with you. The morning after the microphone in the square, I woke with the strange lightness of someone who'd crossed a bridge and arrived on the other side in one piece. I opened the window and let the cold air in. The neighborhood was as noisy as ever, but I heard it differently. I made coffee, ran my hand over my grandson's drawing of 3 figures holding hands, and placed it in plain sight, like someone choosing where to rest their gaze when their courage falters. The phone vibrated. Quick messages. Alvaro sent a raised finger. Donna Inez wrote that the cheese bread was waiting. Mateus sent an inside joke from the barbershop. Among the messages, there was also the calculated silence of someone who preferred to say nothing. What's unsaid speaks. I've learned. I found Miguel at the usual bench. He smiled with the newspaper in his lap, the smile of someone who followed every word, even without the microphone. We walked slowly, as if the entire street were freshly plowed ground. At the corner, a man commented loudly about good manners. I felt the old reflex telling me to shrink back, but Miguel squeezed my wrist lightly. I took a breath, greeted the man, and continued on. The city tests, and our pace responds. At the barbershop, Mr. Nestor looked at me in the mirror and asked if I kept the 2-blade clipper. I did, While the blade sang, two customers discussed soccer and politics. One of them taunted me about people who want to be seen. Another replied that no one wants a medal for simply existing. I didn't go in. I let the radio with an old bolero do the work of filling the gaps. At the end, Mr. Nestor squeezed my shoulder. He said that when I was a boy, he'd held my head for my first cut, that his hand was still steady. I left with a clean neck and an open door feeling. After lunch, Helena arrived unannounced. She was carrying fruit and a notebook. She said she wanted to write down family recipes and that I needed to teach her how to season Sunday chicken. She's a better cook than me, but I understood her request. We sat in the kitchen talking quietly, mixing seasoning with memories. Halfway through cooking, she asked if I was ready for the twisted stories people make up. I said that twisted stories do exist, but that now I had a voice to straighten out whatever was needed. She smiled, cut the parsley, and said that if I stumbled, she'd hold my arm. Truth, when embraced at home, gains strength. That night, Daniel showed up carrying an old game board. I already knew what that meant. We sat at the table and set up the pieces with the solemnity of two toy generals. As we moved around the board, he mentioned that the video of the square had been circulated in some groups. I asked if he was okay with it. He said he was dealing with it. He asked me not to let the city become the center of my life, that no one can stand living according to what others think. I agreed and changed the subject to an old game he always fell for. He laughed and fell for it again. A child's laughter is like water that washes away. The next day I went to volunteer. The hallway still had harsh echoes, but also open arms. A woman who always brings blankets approached a large bag and asked for help. As we carried it, she said the world has improved because people speak out more. That when she was young, many disappeared due to lack of voice. I thanked her, without a speech. At the end of the activity, the coordinator called me back. He said some donated less that week, others donated more. He also said that if I preferred, I could stay behind the scenes for a while. I replied that I would help wherever I could and that I didn't need a display. He nodded. The truth fit on a discreet shelf, and for now, that was fine. Miguel invited me to dinner at his daughter's house. I hesitated but accepted. It was an important step. I arrived with a simple cake. The house smelled of tomato sauce, and I started a conversation. Miguel's daughter welcomed me with a short, sincere hug. He said he didn't want to lose his father to fear or gossip. He wanted me to take care of him and myself without making any promises. We sat at the table. We talked about souvenirs, work, how time leaves its mark on our skin, unable to erase a shining eye. In the end, she walked me to the door and said that whole people set good examples for children. I returned home with a relief I couldn't name, but not everything would go smoothly. The next morning, I found an unsigned piece of paper at the front desk. It said that everyone knows what they do in their own bed, but that the street needs respectable people. I took a deep breath, folded the paper, and threw it away. I didn't respond. Sometimes the answer is not offering an audience. I told Miguel. He looked at me calmly and said that if I wanted, I could keep the paper as a reminder of what we'd overcome. I preferred to forget. Instead of keeping the papers, we decided to plant something in the backyard. We went to the market and bought herb seedlings. We planted basil, rosemary, and mint. Small cares help the mind remember where life springs from. On Saturday, Alvaro dragged me for a long walk. He said he wanted me to feel tired for a simple reason, not because of an argument. We walked to the top of the neighborhood. From up there, the streets looked like lines in a notebook. He asked me if I was thinking about living with Miguel. I told him it was still early, that we each had our own home, our own habits, our own photos, that I needed to respect Rita's time, my children's time, my own time. He said that haste is a relative of stumbling, but that desire needs to be named to exist. I named it right then and there. I wanted to build a daily routine, with Miguel day by day, without hiding it and without excessive heels. Alvaro smiled, sat on the curb, and took 2 childhood candies from his pocket. The sugar stuck to my teeth, and I was grateful that there are still simple things that set the course. In the afternoon, I took my grandson to the square. He brought the trick cards. I messed up on purpose, and he taught me with the patience of a young teacher. In the middle of the game, the ice cream man offered us a new flavor. We accepted. Miguel arrived later, and the boy ran up to him naturally. The normal I'd spent decades dreading presented itself in its entirety in the form of 2 cones and a childish giggle. Then I realized that the city learns slowly, but it does learn. Some people never want to learn, and that's okay. What matters is the wheel that turns in our backyard. That night, I rang Rita's doorbell. I brought flowers, not to correct the past, which cannot be corrected, but to care for the present. We talked in the living room. She asked if I was ready to move on without backing down at every whisper. I replied yes, but that fear sometimes visits. She said that fear is the price of change, and that courage is paid in small installments. I promised to fulfill the installments. She asked me to go to her grandson's birthday party the following week, with Miguel if I wanted. There was thoughtfulness in that offer. I thanked her. On the way out, she said that if I fell, I should get up with the same hand I chose to walk with. I lay down with my head full and for the first time in a long time, slept without negotiating with shadows. I dreamed of the school of 1979 and the square of today in the same frame. I woke before the sun. I write this, looking at the light coming through the window. If my story touches you, if it reminds you of a love you've held dear for decades, leave a like and write in the comments, and I'll move on. I want to know who's with me when the city tests and when the square gives back our full name. Do you want me to continue and tell you how my grandson's birthday became living proof that family isn't a fixed design? It's a place we truly sustain. My grandson's birthday arrived as a test I hadn't chosen, but one I had to face. Helena's house was decorated with balloons, a brigadeiro table, and a simple cake with colorful candles. I arrived early to help cut fruit and arrange the chairs. With each dish I placed on the table, I thought of the invisible chairs. That also needed a place. My entire history, my past with Rita, Miguel's presence. Helena, practical, gave me a list of things to gather and said the essentials were already in place: affection, patience, and space to breathe. As the guests began to arrive, I felt that old flutter in my stomach. Relatives with easy laughter, curious neighbors, the boys' friends from school. Daniel stood near the barbecue, busying his hands to organize his thoughts. Rita moved around with serious elegance, a diplomacy I'd come to respect. Miguel was missing. I found myself checking the door as if it were a clock. He arrived without fanfare, carrying a brown paper package and a smile that asked permission. I went to the gate. We hugged, not as if the party were ours, but as if we recognized that we were part of it too. I introduced ourselves. This is Miguel, a friend of many years. The word friend carried layers that everyone could interpret as they wished. The little boy saw us and ran. He took Miguel's hand naturally, dragged them both to the cake and placed it in the circle of those who matter. It was the simplest and most important gesture of the day. The first half hour was spent in careful conversation. An uncle joked about my jacket. A neighbor asked if I still volunteered. I said yes for now. Someone else commented that the city was different. I smiled and offered a soda. The taut ropes of coexistence began to loosen when Helena turned on the music and invited everyone to sing Happy Birthday. The boy blew out the candles with the strength of someone inaugurating a world, and the world didn't fall apart. Miguel and I held the same knife for the first slice at the birthday boy's request. The photo captured something that had always eluded me, the lightness of the obvious. Rita stayed close, watching every movement, but never blocking our path. At one point she brought 2 slices of cake and placed them on our plates. There was no speech, just a gesture. I thanked her with my eyes. She continued to the kitchen, and I understood that there had begun a way of walking side by side without getting in each other's way. After the birthday greetings, the inevitable conversations began. A cousin asked how long I'd known Miguel. I told him straight, without fussing. An old friend approached and said he remembered us from our youth, always laughing loudly as we left the movie theater. There was no accusation, just remembrance. Helena, noticing the air had thinned, called us in for a family photo. The impromptu photographer asked us to gather closer. Miguel and I stood in the back, as if we weren't taking the lead but weren't shying away from the frame. The photo was shared with the family group with a simple caption, "Good day." Not everything was smooth sailing. A neighbor whispered something in the hallway. An elderly man avoided my eyes. My heart reacted with the old cringe reflex. I recoiled for a second, but my grandson pulled me back to see the card. Trick! The world rearranged itself on the porch table. He missed again and laughed again. I learned there that new reality is sustained by small scenes, repeated until they become habit. Late in the afternoon, I sat for a moment on the backyard step. I watched the light hitting the slowly deflating balloons. Miguel approached without an audience. He said he was happy to see my children looking at me as if they were looking at a whole man. I took a deep breath and let my body believe it. Daniel appeared with 2 glasses of juice. He handed one to each of us and stood without a word. He simply said the meat had finished just right. In our language, it was a vote of confidence. On Monday, the volunteer coordinator called me in for a chat. He said he respected my dedication, but that some people were uncomfortable. He suggested I stay behind the scenes. I said I could fold towels, sort baskets, carry boxes. Helping is a verb that applies to many places. I just asked him not to use my name as a warning sign. He was quiet for a moment, then said that the community is still learning, and I replied that I was too. I left feeling like no doors had been slammed, even if some windows were slow to open. That same day, Alvaro called me to clear his head. We walked around the block and he listened more than he spoke. When I got home, I found a note in the mailbox from Donna Inés with 2 cheese bread rolls and a short message. "It's good to see you smiling." I put the note in the drawer of things that strengthen me. That night we had dinner at Miguel's house. His daughter wanted to know how the party went. I told her about the cake, the photo, the small tensions that didn't turn into a storm. She listened and said that childhood teaches us quickly. Then she set the coffee on the table and said that if her father and I ever wanted to travel, she'd keep an eye on the plants. I laughed at the loving earnestness of this announcement. Crumbs of the future, I thought. The week continued with this mix of normal and new. A neighbor stopped me on the street to say he respected my courage, even if he didn't understand. I thanked him. Another asked if I wasn't afraid of losing friends. I replied that anyone who leaves because of my truth has already been gone for a long time. What stays, stays better. I began to notice myself breathing more deeply. Sleep returned to visit me regularly. My appetite for simple things returned. Vegetable soup, bread and butter, old. Music. Within me, the image of the closet began to fade. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled my steps. I asked Miguel to plant 2 more seedlings in the backyard. He brought rosemary and sage. He said patience and perfume are a good pair for navigating roads that still test us. If my story resonates with you, follow me. Like now and write in the comments. I'm on the side of truth. I want to know who's walking with me when fear slams and the family learns a new way to be. Together. Want me to follow you and tell you about the day I returned to volunteering to stack baskets, and a lady handed me a bag with the most accurate phrase I've ever heard about starting over. I'll follow you from here. I returned to volunteering on a cloudy morning, with no audience or announcement. I arrived early before the rush to fold towels and assemble baskets. My hands, busy with routine, helped me organize my chest. The coordinator appeared with a clipboard and a brief smile. He said I could stay in the warehouse taking care of the donations. I agreed. Helping also means silence, I thought. As I lined up packages of rice and beans, a woman wearing a blue scarf entered slowly. She looked at me with the attention of someone who's experienced it all and asked if I could carry a bag to her car. The bag didn't weigh as much as the moment. I drove calmly. Before closing the door, she touched my arm and said the most accurate phrase I've ever heard about new beginnings. We start walking the size of the step we can handle. The rest comes later. I stood there, her words lighting a corner of my mind that was still dark. Later, 2 volunteers arrived, whispering. One greeted me with his usual politeness. The other deflected. I didn't respond harshly. I grabbed a stack of notebooks and asked where to put them. I received simple instructions. I did what I had to do. Late in the morning, Donna Inés came in with a basket of cheese bread and placed it on the common table. She said it was hot, and that good work requires good food. I smiled to myself. I sat in a corner and ate one slowly, thinking about the note she'd sent me days before. Near me, a young man commented that he admired those who kept coming, even when the city was talking. I said I was learning to come too. On the way out, the coordinator called me back. He said some people had made comments and that he was monitoring them. I replied that I didn't need to justify myself to each runner. I just wanted to keep serving. He nodded, making no promises. I walked to the sidewalk as fast as I could manage. In my pocket, the lady's phrase kept me company. The rest comes later. I met Miguel in the square. I told him about the silent shift, the stairs and the cheese bread. He listened with his elbows resting on his knees, as if holding the world together with his entire body. He said he respected my way of carrying on. He said that courage is also maintaining the daily gesture, not just raising a flag. I agreed. Sometimes that's what it is, the gesture. Late in the afternoon, I stopped by the barber shop. Mr. Nestor carefully put the cape on me. Mateus asked if I wanted a 2-blade shave. I did. While the clippers were humming, an old customer came in. He recognized me and offered that provocation disguised as a joke. He said the neighborhood is strange. Mr. Nestor cut him with dry elegance. He said the neighborhood is human. The man laughed weakly and changed the subject. When I finished, the mirror returned to me a face I recognized and that, at the same time, seemed to be breathing easier. I paid, thanked him, and Mateus said goodbye, which sounded like a return to normality. At home, the phone rang. It was Daniel. He wanted to know if I'd be up for watching the game on Sunday. I said yes. He said he'd call Miguel if I wanted. The sentence came out smoothly. I felt the ground shift. On Sunday, we adjusted the television and set the table with simple sandwiches. The game rolled and the topic strayed from the script. Daniel asked Miguel about his childhood, his daughter and music. Miguel answered without intruding. Rita stopped by to leave a book with Helena and, seeing the room full, came in for 5 minutes. She petted her grandson, asked if I was taking my usual medication and looked at Miguel without looking away. Her departure was a pattern of coexistence I never would have imagined months before. On Monday, I opened the closet and pulled out an old, loose-leaf folder. I began scribbling sentences. The community's open microphone still echoed through the neighborhood, and without telling anyone, I tested words on paper, not to make a speech, but to try to hear myself. I wrote about the square of my adolescence, about the phone I never rang, about the birthday photo in which the cake knife became a symbol of sharing. I wrote that truth doesn't need announcement, but it does need continuity. I stopped before the last line. I didn't want to force life to be a stage. I wanted to be ready if life offered. That night, Helena called me. She said the boy had asked why I hadn't yet shown the neighborhood his grandson's drawing, the drawing of 2 hands holding hands under a yellow sun. I laughed. She laughed with me. Then she became serious and said I didn't need to speak into the microphone if it would hurt me, that it also took courage to say no today. I thanked her for this kind of care that leaves us free. Soon after, Alvaro sent a message with 3 words that sewed me together. I hear you. Friendships lasting decades become just that, a phrase that sustains. In the following days, I made small choices that didn't seem small. I went to the market with Miguel in the morning, to the same bread section where his laughter had found me months earlier. Noticing 2 acquaintances in the aisle, we didn't stray to another shelf. We walked calmly through. I paid for my groceries and greeted whoever greeted me. We went to Donna Inez's cafe and sat by the window. She came with 2 cups and an extra napkin. She said the table looked beautiful. The world didn't have to spin to understand. At home, I planted the herbs in the flower bed. The scent of rosemary wafted up, and I memorized the sage's name like someone adopting a ritual. I cooked a simple soup and took a pot to Rita. She opened the door in a wool sweater, welcomed me, and spent a few minutes chatting in the hallway. She told me she'd started a ceramics course. She said clay teaches the hand to be patient. We treated that word with respect. Patient. It seemed like an agreement that finally fit the 3 of us. I returned to volunteer on another cloudy morning. The same lady with the blue scarf was there, folding clothes with discipline. She called me by name as if she knew me from before. She said she'd read a story about men who take a long time to choose themselves. She said she found it beautiful when the author said that life sometimes offers a second door in the same hallway. I felt she was speaking to me without exposing myself. I helped fill boxes, stacked what needed to be stacked, and left with my heart more whole than when I arrived. If my story helps you cross your own aisle, come with me. Like now and write in the comments, I'll speak for myself. I want to see who's finding words to break out of the silence, even if it's in small steps. I'll continue from here if you'd like, telling you about the open mic, what I wrote on that piece of paper, and what the neighborhood decided to hear when I took a deep breath and chose my voice. The day of the open mic arrived with clear skies and a wind that seemed to sweep away ancient dust. I woke early, made coffee, and reread the sentences I'd scribbled during the week. They weren't speeches, they were steps, folded. The sheets fit in my shirt pocket. I ran my hand through them like someone checking an ID. Miguel texted me saying he was already up, willing to go if I wanted. I replied that I would go, and that I wanted to walk to the square feeling the ground beneath my feet. In the hallway, I picked up my grandson's drawing. The 2 hands held together under a simple sun reminded me why I was going. Along the way, the neighborhood went about its Saturday life. The news vendor shouted the headline, a puppy sniffed the shade of the trees, 2 girls practiced dance steps on the sidewalk. Common has always been my language, I thought. What I needed was to speak the common language without hiding it. Arriving at the square, I saw the bizarre tables dismantled and, on the bandstand, a microphone attached to a stand. The organizer tested the sound with a hello and a two. A small group spread out on the benches. Alvaro saw me and raised his hand. Donna Inés arranged bottles of water on the edge of a table. So Nestor chatted with Mateus, who waved at me naturally. Miguel arrived soon after, wearing a light-colored shirt and empty pockets. He doesn't take notes, trusting what his body has already learned. He leaned next to me and asked if I wanted to speak first or listen. I said I wanted to listen a bit, gauge the wind, respect the pulse. The organizer explained the dynamics. Whoever wanted could come up and speak for 3 minutes without attacking. It was a space for messages from the community. A man commented on a pothole in the street. A young woman asked for support for the artisans' fair. A teacher spoke about the book drive. When the microphone became free, I felt the papers weigh down my pocket. Miguel noticed my movement and said nothing. He simply took a deep breath with me, in unison. I stood up. The path to the bandstand seemed short and long at the same time. I climbed the step, grabbed the microphone and saw the faces that had watched me grow old, and hide. The sound came out clear. I gave my name and that I'd lived there since before the asphalt. I said I had a simple message, one that fits into everyday life. I told him I'd spent years living in fragments, trying to please every street sign. I told him I'd loved a man in my youth, that we'd lost each other, and that life had brought that encounter back. I spoke slowly, without full names, without bravado. I repeated that I wasn't there to ask for applause or forgiveness, but to say that I had chosen to breathe whole, and that I intended to continue helping, buying bread, getting my hair cut in the same chair, visiting family, holding the hand of the one I love without asking permission to exist. There was silence, not the kind of silence that judges, but the kind that thinks. I added that I didn't want to fight with anyone, and that I understood those who needed time. I said that doors were still open for conversation, that I knew how to listen. I thanked the neighborhood for being home, and I ended with a phrase from my grandson's drawing. Family is when we smile without hiding it. I handed the microphone back and went downstairs. My legs trembled a little, but they reached the ground. The sounds returned slowly. Alvaro clapped, few and firm. Donna Inés raised a glass of water in a silent greeting. A young man I barely knew nodded. The volunteer coordinator kept his hands clasped, but nodded. A woman turned her face away and took a deep breath. A couple got up and left quietly. I didn't judge any of their gestures. I needed time too. Miguel didn't come running. He waited for me to take 2 steps forward and then stood beside me. He didn't take my hand right away. First he asked if I was okay. I was. The hand came later, a brief touch, enough to say, "We are okay." My son, Daniel, appeared at the edge of the square. He didn't approach. He gave a shy thumbs up and continued talking to the boy near the fountain. Helena arrived with the drawing in a folder. Silently, she showed it from afar. I smiled. I saw Rita across the street. She stopped, watched the circle, and rested her hand on her bag. When our eyes met, she inclined her head briefly. For me, it was an agreement. After a few speeches about the community garden and the futsal championship, the microphone was turned off. The organizer thanked me and said that was it. Everyone should take a little care home. I drew a path to the water table. Donna Inés handed me a glass and an extra napkin. She whispered that she was happy to hear me without shouting. I laughed. I said the shouting had gone away when my embarrassment got tired of giving orders. Mr. Nestor squeezed my shoulder and mentioned that camera number 2 was waiting for me on Monday. Mateus asked if I would teach him that old cut from the photo of my youth. I laughed. I said that time had made another cut, but that we would try. The coordinator arrived last. He thanked me for maintaining a respectful tone. He said some people were still uncomfortable, but that the house rule was to coexist. I replied that I wanted to keep contributing, even when my heart was racing. He said he'd see us in the warehouse on Tuesday. I felt the hallway widen a millimeter. Miguel and I went to eat a sandwich at our usual stand. We sat in silence, chewing slowly. He asked me what I'd felt up there. I said I'd felt the ground. All I'd wanted, for decades, was to feel the ground. I told him I'd looked out over the square and seen the boy I once was, sitting on the cement bench, waiting for a world that never came. And now I myself had gone to find my life. Miguel closed his eyes for a second, as if memorizing an image. As I left the stand, A small voice called out to me. It was the lady with the blue scarf, without it because of the heat. She said she'd heard me and that she didn't have answers for everything, but that she knew how to recognize when a man chooses to stop abandoning himself. She said she'd lost her husband early and that what comforts me is seeing people choose to live while they can. She wished me patience. I thanked her for the nameless blessing. I returned home feeling lighter. At the gate, I picked up my phone and for the first time invited those who follow me here to walk with me directly. If my story resonates with you, leave a like now, because it will help this narrative reach other men who need a boost of courage. And write in the comments and I'll choose my voice. I want to see who's willing to speak for themselves, even if it's just a whisper. Each comment becomes a piece of the square. Each like makes room for someone else to sit on the bench. That night I put the pages away in the back of the drawer, not out of shame but because they were already inside me. My entire body knew the lines. I slept to the sound of birds making room for Sunday. Through the window, the moon looked like a porcelain cup. I thought that in the end that's what I did today. I held the cup with both hands and drank slowly. Tomorrow I'll wake up and carry on, with the market, the barbershop, volunteering, family and love by my side. Without spectacle, with truth, and with the square to remind us that the world doesn't need to collapse for us to exist. The morning after the open mic, I woke with a calm I'd never known. My body seemed aligned with what I'd said in the square. I made coffee, put the papers in the back of the drawer and went for a walk. On the way I met Alvaro, who handed me a bag of warm bread. He said the bakery had leftovers from the batch and that sharing bread cured tiredness. I thanked him. It was a simple gesture and therefore precious. At the beginning of the week I returned to volunteering. The coordinator called me in for a chat before the activity. He mentioned the repercussions, the messages on the group list, and people who expressed surprise. I said I understood. I suggested spending some time behind the scenes, setting up tables, handling boxes, to give space to those who still needed to adjust. He agreed. It wasn't a demotion. It was a way to stay out of trouble. I spent the afternoon labeling donations, and none of the labels stuck. At the barbershop, Mr. Nestor adjusted the clippers and said the usual cut works for new times. We laughed. Mateus asked if courage can be taught. I said no, but it can be trained. It's a muscle we wake up every day. He thought about it like someone learning how to use scissors. 2 customers spoke softly. I didn't understand the words. I understood the tone. I let it linger. The air no longer held me back. At home, Helena texted me, asking if I'd welcome Miguel for Sunday lunch. I said yes, as long as she felt comfortable. She said that was precisely why she wanted it, that children learn from what they see, and that her grandfather's house could be a respectful classroom. On the appointed day, Rita arrived early, as always. She brought a bowl of farofa. She placed it on the table and said that the taste of childhood doesn't require choosing sides. I was speechless for a moment. I thanked her with all my might. Miguel arrived later with wine and a small pot of basil. He entered without posing. He greeted Rita politely and with distance. Daniel was a little tense, but he took a deep breath. My grandson came running to show me the card trick. He tried. He failed. He laughed. Miguel laughed along. The table slowly cleared up. Daniel started a conversation about soccer. Helena told me about her school project. Rita described a book she was reading. I served the rice, washed my hands, sat down, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Home. After lunch, Rita called me into the kitchen. He said he was afraid I'd disappear. I replied that now I was learning to stay. She nodded. He asked me to make sure neither of us turned into the other's staircase. I promised. Back in the living room, Miguel was washing dishes with Daniel. It was an unlikely and yet natural scene. The drops hit the aluminum in an everyday rhythm. Life fits into sounds like that. Late in the afternoon, I walked Miguel to the door. He asked me how I was. I said I was tired and grateful. He smiled. He told me he too felt something new, a kind of pleasant silence that lives between people when words have done their work. We said goodbye with a brief hug. I didn't hide it. Helena saw, Daniel saw, Rita saw, no one looked away. The following days brought thorns. An acquaintance stopped me on the street and told me I was too old for invention. I calmly replied that it wasn't invention, it was life. He chuckled. I smiled. Back and continued on. At church, a lady commented on values. I helped put away the chairs and didn't argue. Later, the same lady brought me a cake. She said that evaluation speeds things up, but cake slows things down. I ate a slice and thanked her. The world has contradictions. People too, me included. Alvaro organized a conversation circle in the bandstand about belonging. I went. Miguel went. A young man showed up with his boyfriend. He said he was afraid of his first job and his first rent. I talked about taking the first step in my 60s. He laughed in amazement. He said he thought courage only existed in youth. I replied that courage has an address at any age, as long as someone turns on the porch light. He wrote that down on his phone. I don't know if it was a pretty phrase, I know it was true from my house. One afternoon, Donna Inés called me to the cafe counter. She handed me a napkin with a handwritten phrase. It read, "Dignity is walking down the street in your own skin." I put it in my pocket. Then she asked if I could choose the playlist for the evening. I put on an old song, the one we danced to in the living room. I didn't make a monument out of the moment. I sat down, drank water, listened to the music, and remembered to breathe. There was also the day of the stumble. Miguel and I were walking when a car drove by slowly. One of the boys in the back seat said a word I wouldn't repeat to anyone. The blow came swiftly and facelessly. I stopped. Miguel grabbed my arm. He told us to keep going. I took 2 steps and felt the wound throb. We sat on a bench. I cried with anger and exhaustion. He didn't try to take the pain away. He gave me space. Then he reminded me of my grandson's drawing. 2 hands and a sun. Life doesn't erase a child's drawing of a bad horn. That same night I received messages, one from Helena, another from Daniel. They wanted to know if I was okay. I told them about the word thrown out the window. Daniel was furious. Helena asked us not to turn around and get hit. I said I would report the incident if it happened again. The agreement was clear. Courage doesn't require recklessness. I won't pick a fight. I'll protect the path. I went to sleep thinking about the square, the Sunday table, Donna Inés's napkin. Before turning out the light, I sat on the edge of my bed and spoke to those who are following me here. If this journey is helping you, leave a like now so this story can reach more people who need to breathe without a mask. And if you've already taken a step that seemed impossible, comment, "I choose to stand." I read everything, and when I see these words, I remember that I don't walk alone. The week ended with a visit to the place where it all began. The old school is now a cultural center. The courtyard has grown larger trees and new benches. I walked slowly, running my hand along the worn railing. I remembered the boy I once was. I remembered the note, folded in a book, the fear of the doorbell, the desire that couldn't pronounce its own name. I sat down and closed my eyes. I felt it the entire time inside my chest. When I opened it, Miguel was at the door, searching for me with his eyes. I waved. He came, sat beside me, and said nothing. Sometimes, what heals is being able to return to the beginning without hiding from yourself. That's what I gained. And there was still more to come. The day of the open mic arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. I woke up early, swept the porch, made coffee, and reread a paper with short notes about truth, respect, and family. I realized I didn't need a script. What I had to say was already in my life. I tucked the paper in my pocket, more out of habit than necessity, and continued on. I arrived at the hall ahead of schedule. The tables were lined up, the sound system was checked, and children were running around with paper bracelets. Donna Inés was arranging cupcakes. Seu Nestor was chatting with 2 neighbors. Mateus was carrying chairs, like someone carrying plans. The volunteer coordinator greeted me carefully. Alvaro entered with a bag of bread and said that broken bread warms silence. I remembered his words. Miguel arrived discreetly, standing beside me without asking anything. Soon after, Helena and Daniel entered with my grandson. He showed me a simple and straightforward drawing. 2 adults holding hands, and he was in the middle with an ice cream cone. I wanted to laugh and cry. Rita appeared later and stood near the door. She didn't come to protect me or keep watch. She came to witness. When the microphone was released, routine messages came in. Clothing collection, rehearsal time, the Square's campaign. The coordinator said any resident could speak. I took a breath. I felt the absence of the ring that was no longer on my finger, and the light weight of being me. I looked at Miguel, my children, Rita, Alvaro, and Donna Inés's table. I walked over to the microphone. I didn't make a long speech. I told them my name, the street I live on, the years I lived there. I told them I loved and hid, that I got married, raised children, served in the church, paid bills, shopped, smiled at neighbors, and yet I left a piece of myself outside for too long. I told them I'd found Miguel again, and that what came back wasn't an old mistake, it was the missing piece. I talked about my grandson's drawing and how children understand what adults complicate. I didn't apologize for existing. I asked for respect and offered respect. I said I don't want to win arguments. I want to be able to buy bread without shrinking and continue serving the community with the same care as always, now whole. I thanked them for listening. My voice trembled at the end, but it didn't break. There was a long second of silence. It was the city measuring people. Mateus clapped, then Alvaro, then Donna Inez with enthusiasm. A lady stood up and left. A young man naturally gave a thumbs up. Mr. Nestor nodded, a firm way of saying he's with me. The coordinator thanked me, passed the microphone, and life went on in the room. I remained standing, breathing like someone learning anew. Miguel approached without opening his arms, letting me choose my distance. I hugged him. It was simple. Helena held my shoulder. Daniel stood back and then arrived. He said he was still adjusting, but he was proud to see me say what had always been missing. Rita looked at me with serene firmness. She said I had done what I needed to do, and that it didn't erase her story. It was true. In the end, I helped collect chairs, an old gesture in a new body. The coordinator said the community is made of real stories. I replied that I was still available for whatever they needed, and that I could stay behind the scenes if it would help. He said I was home, that was enough. The following days brought small scenes. At the bakery, Donna Marcia retaliated with a shy smile. At the barbershop, Mateus asked what song Miguel and I had danced to in the living room, and played it on the radio. Mr. Nestor grumbled about the soundtrack, but didn't lower the volume. At the cafe, Inez handed me a napkin and asked me to write down the phrase my grandson had unknowingly given me. Family is when laughter reaches 3 hands. She posted it on the bulletin board. I also saw harsh looks and heard a curse from a moving car. I don't romanticize wounds. I heal wounds with my feet. Now I know who to ask for water when my body weakens. That night, I received a message from Miguel's daughter. She said her father seemed more alive and thanked me for being in his life. I replied that his life had also returned to me. On Sunday, Helena prepared lunch and asked me to bring the music. Daniel arrived with fruit. Rita stayed a while and went to the movies with a friend. My grandson tried the card trick. He failed and we laughed together. The house breathed. I sat down later to talk to you, who are following me. You remember how it all began. An ordinary Tuesday. The Fae. Barber's chair. The laughter that crossed the street and took me back 40 years in a second. From then on, I've experienced silence, guilt, fear, laughter, shame, tenderness, and courage. It wasn't cinema. It was life. Today, I look at that same street and understand that what knocked on my door that day wasn't just an old love. It was the chance to exist fully before time closed its curtains. If this story spoke to you, mark this moment now. Leave your like so this story reaches other men who still walk in silence. Subscribe to the channel to see what comes next. Write in the comments, I choose the truth. I'll look for that quote and want to know who walked with me from the laughter in the barbershop to the microphone in the salon. If you know someone who needs to hear that there's still time to choose their own life, share this video. The next chapter is below, and I invite you to stay with me. There I'll tell you how we move on from here, how the city slowly learns, how the family regroups, how love matures when it emerges from the shadows. I end as I began, but in a new way. Have you ever wondered what would happen if, after 40 years, the love you swore to bury knocked on your door again? I opened it. It hurt. It healed. And it still does. Today I walk slowly with Miguel's hand in mine, in my pocket when I can't, in plain sight when I can, without turning back. Thank you for sticking around. Click on the next video and come with me. Let's move on.